A good month for everybody over here. This is the month of Tammuz, as we discussed on Shabbat. The Tammuz is the fourth month of the year, Nisan being the first, Iyar the second, Sivan being the third, and Tammuz is the fourth. We know that, and we discussed this in the Pesach classes, the juxtaposition between Gimel and Daled is the provider and the recipient. The Gimel is Gomel, the one who bestows, the one who gives. And Dal is Dalim, the impoverished. Gomel Dalim means that the one who has needs to give and satisfy the impoverishment. Incidentally, the halacha is that when someone gives, it's not based on their need. It's based on the recipient's needs. And the practical implication is that if the person prior to falling down to a state of impoverishment was riding a horse, they were accustomed to riding horses, for example, the generosity that needs to be given to them is to buy them a horse, to bring them back to where they need to be. Gomel Dali means that being that they're impoverished has a need, it is up to the one who it has the influence to impart that and to give that. And that's a symbiotic relationship. So too within our own lives. In each one of our lives, we have the part that is very strong and it's very confident and is very luminescent. And there's a part of our lives which needs attention, which feels impoverished. The part of us that has, as we discussed on Shabbos, on Shabbat, that all elements that occupy time and space are limited to the quantity and the quality of themselves, of how much they can give. For example, if a person has 10 cents and now they give a cent, so now they have 9 cents. Somebody who has a cup of water and they have to share that water with someone else, then now whatever water was given to the other person is no longer available in the cup. In other words, in giving, one has to experience a personal loss, which is a sacrifice. I must give, but I need to give, I must give. If there would be another configuration where I didn't have to give, I would much rather maintain this for myself. But now that there is a recipient and they're impoverished, I can't just let them remain impoverished, I must act, because the Torah tells me so. But the same word, as we discussed many times, because I just saw right before I came on, that the Sparks is doing on YouTube is doing, and I'm very surprised because I know where it came from. I know I remember when I wrote it and when I posted it on Facebook, but as far as a song is concerned, it doesn't rhyme. But the sacrifice is the offering. The other perspective, the holistic perspective, is it's not a sacrifice, you're offering. You're giving what was always meant to be provided, and that's what we give it to you. All other elements other than fire upon being shared have to incur a loss. But fire is very different. A candle for one is a candle for a million. No matter how many candles one fire ignites, and never takes away from himself. It's the opposite. When when the candle in itself ignites another, then that only intensifies the light and the warmth and the radiance. So from this perspective, when one needs to give, they need to give everything that the recipient needs. But there's a symbiotic relationship, because when one gives to the recipient, not only doesn't take away from the provider, it actually enhances the overall. Okay, let's get into to this week's subject. Being that we touched upon a foundational discourse last week in our class, I thought it'll be well worth it to delve into this discourse. Being that it's Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, as we come to Gimel Tammuz, we know that in our generation, 1994, it was the Rebbe's Hilulah, but Gimel Tammuz holds a prestigious place in Jewish history, both in biblical times, when Yehoshua entered the land of Jericho, Hashem held the sun up through the day and the night in order to give them a strategic advantage. In other words, Gimel Tammuz essentially is a day of beyond nature, that supersedes nature, for the benefit of Am Yisrael. 1927 was Gimel Tammuz, where was the previous Rebbe was released from Shpolenka, from his incarceration that was meant to end up with the execution that very night. But as the Rebbe discussed in the last talk that we have for Parshat Gimel Tammuz, Parshat Korach, the Rebbe asked a foundational question. We know the Gemara says, the Talmud says, that a tzaddik decrees and Hashem fulfills. That's the setup that Hashem put into creation. The previous Rebbe, upon being arrested for being a proud Jew who encourages to the point of self-sacrifice, proud Jewry, he was arrested and was executed for the horrible crimes of being a proud Jew, whose entire focus was Judaism. As brought down in the Likutei Diburim, if you haven't yet had the privilege of learning the diary of the arrest of the release of the previous Rebbe, this is a complete layout, a map, a blueprint for what heroicism looks like, for how do we deal with our own inner KGB agents. And every single word in that diary is Torah, is instruction, because there are many, many, many details that the previous Rebbe didn't write about. We found out through the KGB files that came out, through other Hasidims accounts who were there present. But that which was committed to writing and was released means it's an instruction for us. So as the previous Rebbe writes, that when the two Jews who entered, Lulav and Nachmanson, entered his home at 12 o'clock at night on Tet Zayin Sivan 1927, and they woke up the Rebbetzin woke up Rebbe, the Rebbe's mother, the previous Rebbe's mother, the Rebbe Rashab's wife. Being that they came from Chassidim themselves, they became a little softer in that moment, because she was crying and wailing to her husband, the Lubavitch Rebbe, who was already departed this world physically, and said they're arresting our only son for propagating Judaism. Gimel Tammuz, the third of Tammuz, was when the previous Rebbe was released from Shparlenka, from that jail where he was supposed to be executed, where he was tortured profusely. A little bit he wrote about, but most of really the physical torture that happened over there, we learned from other accounts, KGB files, etc. When the previous Rebbe was released, being that there was no official communication or so on and so forth, and based on the statistics of that place at those times, a lot of people unfortunately assumed that they executed the Rebbe. So the last talk that the Rebbe gave, our Rebbe, in 1991, Parshat Korach Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe said that Gimel Tammuz was a day that, to begin with, appeared like a day that the opposite of life for the Nasi, for the Rebbe. But in reality, it was the beginning of the Geula. But in that talk, the Rebbe asked a question. Being that the Tzaddik decrees and Hashem must fulfill, the Rebbe himself, the previous Rebbe, could have been easily, spiritually and physically annulled the entire Shparlenka. Why didn't he? Why did he incur all the torture? Being beaten severely, being thrown down the stairs, being kicked in the head over and over and over and over while he was on the floor, to the point of unconsciousness, being beaten to unconsciousness many times. Mind you, the Rebbe, at that point, the Rebbe already had MS. Why did the Rebbe just annul it then? He had the power to do a miracle and annul everything. The Rebbe explains, because the entire purpose of the Geula that is going to penetrate the lowest of the low. And for that, the Nasi has to have Mesiras Nefesh to go into the pits of the pits of the pits, and to transform it from within. And that's exactly what the Rebbe did. Going through that, as the previous Rebbe writes in the preface to the diary, the previous Rebbe put in a letter that he wrote to someone as a preface, and is printed in Likutei Diburim as well, that I went in to this ordeal with Mesiras Nefesh. No, it's going to cost. And it did. But that's the only way to be able to transform the darkness. Transforming darkness doesn't come with logic, because logic and emotions operate on measure. They're quantifiable. There's only a certain amount that a person can understand. Even the greatest love that a person can feel while the neshama is in the body is still limited to the capacity of the person. In order to transform darkness, you have to go to a place where where it's unlimited, and that's the Pintaliyid. That's the quintessential self. And that could only be brought out in Mesiras Nefesh. And for that reason, Golus is extending and extending. So every single detail could be operated upon from within, not just to heat it up on the surface, but the inside remains raw. For that reason, we're being drawn to the nitty gritty of things. Incidentally, yesterday there was a conference, a very interesting conference. It was a 3-hour conference that the conference that focuses on implementing AI technology in order to disseminate Torah outwards. And the last speaker, Rabbi Schmuckler, spoke about that. Well, everybody else spoke about how do we transmit Hasidus? How do you bring how AI could bring Hasidus down for children, and all the tools that we have today in order to learn Torah on a whole different level. He brought one particular point, which was like the sum total of everything, which is we're able to make music now in order to reveal the Torah. And he cited a talk from the Rebbe that that's the entire purpose of the technology, not just to transmit like a radio, but to innovate and to bring it to the nitty gritty, which is what AI is doing. But that's the same applies to our lives as well. Each one of us are brought to the nitty gritty in order for us to be able to operate from within to transform the actual spark. But that begins with our perception. That perception cannot get in the way. And it has to be translucent. So for that reason, I thought, why not delve into a discourse which we actually learned several years ago? But this is a foundational discourse, and a discourse that we brought in our class last week. A discourse was the previous Rebbe said here in America, in Chicago, in 1930, when the previous Rebbe first visited America, in order to every single place where the previous Rebbe went and sojourn and give Hasidus, became a thriving Jewish community with yeshivot, et cetera, et cetera. This discourse begins with a teaching, a Talmudic teaching, in the assessment of the Shema Yisrael, in discussing the laws of the Shema, and as we discussed many times before, there are two places in davening in which one must have intention. The first place is in Poteach et Yedecha u'mezbirach ochayton. You open up your hands and you satisfy or satiate the will of every living being. Over there, we must have. Hold on one second. We must have intention. You have to ask Hashem for what you need. As we discussed many times over in Shabbat davening, that Poteach et Yedecha, that Hashem opens up His generous hands and bestows it upon us, not just what we need, what we want. But also, Chassidus explains, Potech et Yedecha could be understood as Potech et Yudecha. He opens up our Yud, our potentials. So we have to have kavanah. You have to have intention when you're saying these words. Potech et Yedecha u'mezbirach, someone has to have kavanah to ask Hashem what we actually want in order to serve Him on a more holistic, more glorious, more expansive manner. The second place where we must have, biblically have kavanah, is the Shema. This discourse is based on a Talmudic discussion in the course of discussing the recital of the Shema and the intention of the Shema. The Talmud says, Kol ha'marich be'echad, anyone who extends the word echad in Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, marichin lo yamav v'shnotav. Hashem will extend his days and his years. Meaning, when a person says the word echad and extends it, then Hashem in turn extends their life. The Talmud then assesses the statement. Amar Rabbi Acha says as follows. Rabbi Acha, the son of Rabbi Yaakov, says as follows. Bedalid. That when this Talmudic statement says one must elongate the Shema, and the Echad is specifically the Dalid in the Echad, that they must extend the Dalid. That's going to extend one's days and years. Amar Rabbi Ashi adds another point. Yes, extend the Dalid, but do not detract from the Chet of the Echad. On a practical level, it's just an Echad. Now, that's the Talmudic discussion. The previous Rebbe starts his esoteric analysis on this discussion. So, question number one. What does it mean to extend the one? And what does it mean that Hashem will extend our days and our years? That's someone who's going to extend the Echad, he's going to live a longer life? Being that the word Echad is comprised of three letters, Aleph, Chet, and Daled. And as per the discussion that we just cited, the extension should be in the Daled. And Rabbi Ashi warns, yes, extend the Daled, but do not detract from the Chet. In other words, one can and must extend the Daled so long as it's not going to interfere with the Chet. This discussion that Rabbi continues is part of a longer discussion, a teaching from Rabbi Meir Balanes. A rabbi taught regarding this verse, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Ad Kan Tzrichin Kavanat Halev, Divrei Rabbi Meir. And this verse, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Rabbi Meir says we have to have what's called intention of the heart. The Rebbe says it's a very interesting way of saying you need to have intention. This addition of the word intention of the heart implies that Shema Yisrael has a very, very unique intention, and it's called the intention of the heart. The Rebbe explains there is what's called kavanat hamuach, there is the intention of the mind, and then kavanat halev, and then there's the intention of the heart. And Rabbi Meir says that for Shema Yisrael, one must have kavanat halev, the intention of the heart. What is the kavanat hamayach? What is the mindful intention? Means that the person, in order to, once a person takes in a piece of information, starts exerting themselves over and over and over and over to understand, to fully understand and grasp that whatever detail they took in just now in order to internalize it. To the point that the person understands it from each side. As the Alter Rebbe brings in the Tanya, when can a person say that they actually grasp something? It's when they're able to take it and turn it and look it from here, and see it from every direction. Incidentally, in the Mishnah, in Pirkei Avot, in chapter 4, it says, "What's the difference between a wise person and a foolish person?" A wise person would say, what they understood, they say I understood. What they didn't understand, they say I don't understand. What they know, they admit to knowing. What they don't know, they admit to not knowing. A foolish person will say that what they know, what they don't know, they know. In his commentaries, I'm going to be asked a question. Well, that assessment doesn't make a wise person or a foolish person. It's either you're honest or the person is deceitful. A person who doesn't understand and says, no, I do get it, seemingly it has nothing to do with being a fool or wise. It has to do with, do you have integrity? Are you honest with yourself? Person who doesn't understand says, no, I do, they're lying. But rather, the Rebbe explains, we're talking about someone who perhaps delved a little bit into the subject matter. And let's just say they understood 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. And they say, nevertheless, although they didn't completely get it and they completely don't have a grasp on it, nevertheless, they foolishly claim, I get it. While a wise person, even have understood 99% of something, will say, I still didn't get it. Kavanas hamoach, the intention of the mind, is to delve into a subject matter until the person fully understands it from each perspective. With all the details, not just the generalities, but all the emanating details. So I'll give you an example. I was the reason why I was late today is because I was calling to a meeting. I got a phone call about just about 11 o'clock from a husband, and then he put his wife on the phone, where they were going at each other. And one of the things that was bothering the husband is that the wife was being obtrusive on different details, not realizing that she was pushing him backward, back and further back and further back. And then when he retreated, she comes, and this is repeated because we sat several times and it repeats. And when he does retreat, then she argues with him. You see, you retreat. And that's all she focuses, not saying that I bring this to you. When in the course of the conversation, I made her understand. I brought it the details in the way that she understood that you're saying half of the story. He's retreating because of the way you're obtrusive. You're not saying the full story. The Yetzer Hara will only speak in half stories. But then 5 minutes later, even though she did understand, she went back again. But you retreat. And he says to her, but what do you want me to do? How do you want me to proceed when you keep on attacking me for things that have nothing to do with truth? So she understands the generality, but not the details of the generality that emanate from the generality. So a person could understand the surface level of the generality, but until the person didn't really delve and understand the detail of every single detail that they could possibly understand, extrapolating from the generality, they didn't get it. Kavanas Hamarach, intention of the mind, is to first and foremost take the generality and start dissecting it detail by detail, or start from a detail and start delving into it until the point you understand its generality. But being that this is the detail of the expression generality, then in this detail is contained the entire generality as well. But that's Kavanas Hamarach. That's the intention of the mind. Kavanas Halev, however, as we said, the Kavanas Halev, the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, requires Kavanas Halev, the intention of the heart, is altogether different. And to a large measure, in Kavanas Halev is the ultimate gauge, and the intention of the heart is the ultimate gauge that is able to exemplify whether or not that person actually understood the subject matter. Kavanas Halev, the previous Rebbe says, is to bring that which you understood and grasp from potential into actual. Where? Specifically in your characteristics. The previous Rebbe has a nigun, a melody. It's a very, very powerful melody. It's called the Beinoni. And one of the explanations of the theme of the Beinoni is, if you know that this is how things should be, then why aren't this way? If you know that you need to be a certain way, then why aren't you doing it? Kavanas Halev means to take that which you know and bring it into the nitty-gritty of your life, into the way you feel about life, the way you respond to life, et cetera, through your emotions. In other words, the Kavanas Halev, the first place where Kavanas Halev begins is to start us creating a healthy and holy self-assessment regarding, and this is the beginning of all service, to make a healthy and holy self-assessment regarding each particular character traits and emotions that we cycle through, and to determine which is good, which is luminescent, which could become brighter, and which is toxic, which is not good, and how much more so if it's toxic. And to now start working on extracting that, to take it out like a root canal, to know that this is, God forbid, an infection, and this infection allowed to continue will eventually Chad v'Shalom paralyze a person. Then you must now start a root canal, go into the depth of this in order to extract it. To the extent that it's like Chametz and Pesach, that it cannot be visible and it cannot be found. And that which is not good, once a person comes to that assessment that their thought processes or communication style or behavior patterns that are not good, whether it's between a person and God or between a person and their fellow, first and foremost, the person needs to realize that this is bad. And once you realize it's bad, then naturally, just like a person realizes that drinking bleach is bad for them, so no matter how much sugar you put into it, no matter how thirsty you become, it wouldn't occur to you to drink bleach because you understand this is the opposite of life. And not only is it not going to satisfy the thirst, it's going to end the need to be thirsty altogether almost immediately. It's going to Chadu Shalom the end, be the end of life. So obviously they have a natural born disdain. They don't even consider at any given point that I'm thirsty. Let me look into my cleaning supply cabinet and drink because there's plenty of liquid there. And some of the liquid look yellow and red and they smell good. So this must taste good and is going to satisfy my needs. It doesn't occur. We have a natural born disdain saying, no, this doesn't even register. Because you know it's 100% cement to your mind that this is not going to work. That's Kavanah Salat. That you take that which you know and work on and weeding out each particular emotion and seeing if it's healthy or not. And his entire endeavor from that point on would be to start planting good meters, good attributes, and correct conduct. You know, very interesting. There's all these gardeners, and I'm seeing this over here, with the front lawn and back lawn and everything else. When we walk into a botanical gardens, anyone who understands in gardening and so on and so forth will understand that one thing for sure, there's a lot of constant work that's being put into this beauty that is in front of us. Because these flowers and these arrangements do not grow in such a fashion naturally. And they have to be constantly tended to and pruned to and so on and so forth. In other words, the botanical garden is the epitome of constant work, constant tending to. But when a person stops tending to the garden, what naturally comes out are weeds. Weeds too are flowers, and some of them could even look very pretty. But when those weeds come out and are allowed to remain, they'll destroy all the garden. And their entire aim is to propagate themselves. In other words, sit back and do nothing and just let everything naturally occur. These flowers are not going to survive. This beauty is not going to survive. This vibrancy is not going to survive. Weeds will grow and take over completely. The weeds are animal soul. Its entire purpose is just survivability. We're here for the animal soul, yes, but its consciousness must be constantly tended to. Constantly. That's the service. And to make sure that our characteristics is an expression for our true selves, for who we really are. Not what's comfortable for us, not what's easy, not what's based on trauma, not the real us. So first and foremost, one needs to assess based on what they know is truth. Now, does that truth, does that reflect of the way I feel, the way I speak, the way I act? Or does that truth remain in its philosophical cosmos? Meanwhile, the emotions and the behavior, the words and the emotions and the behaviors are like weeds just propagating for survivability, taking all the goodness that we understood and destroying it. So we have Kavanah Sameach, the intention of the mind, which is to delve into the generality as well as the emerging details until we fully grasped it, that we could understand it from each perspective. Kavanas Halev, the intention of the heart, is to take that which you understood and to now utilize it in order to properly assess our speech, our emotions, our actions, to weed out anything that doesn't belong. Because if this is the truth, then you have to align yourself with it. And then at the same time, to start implanting healthy and holy emotions, healthy and holy words, and healthy and holy behaviors. That's Kabbalah Salam. Let's continue the discourse. Now, the recitation of the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is Yidiyat Vasagas Achdus Habayre. The mitzvah of there, as we discussed in several classes, there are time-based mitzvot. For example, Shabbat is on Friday afternoon towards sunset until Saturday evening after sundown, after the emergence of three stars. The fasting of Yom Kippur is on the ninth of Tishrei towards the evening, and continues to sundown. On the 10th of Tishrei. Putting on tefillin in the daytime, lighting Shabbat candle, and so on and so forth. Time-based mitzvot. There are mitzvot which are mitzvot midiyot, continual mitzvot which apply at all times to all people in all places. One of them is the base is faith in Hashem and the knowledge of Hashem's oneness, the acceptance of Hashem's oneness, Achadut Hashem. Now, the recitation of the Shema is not just by the way to say it. One must have intention in saying those words. Namely, that there's none other than God. That God is everything, from above to below. Because Baruch Shem Kvo Malchut Olam is below to above. Everything is God. And this is the meaning of the words of Shema. That the Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, that the Yisrael should to listen. Listening is akin to understanding, to internalizing. That Havaya is Elokeinu. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. That Israel should internalize that Yud Kei Vav Kei is Elokeinu. What does it mean, Elokeinu? Elokeinu, our God in English, but we know and we discussed many times that Hashem's names represents forces within creation. The way Hashem reveals himself throughout creation. Elokeinu, what does it mean? Kochenu v'chiyosenu, our strength, our nature is Elokeinu. Elokim means strength. So what do we have to listen, what do we have to internalize? That our natural born strength is Havaya, is Yudke Vavke. Because Elohim, numerologically, is equivalent to the word Hateva, nature. And it also means strength, because the nature of any given created entity is, in fact, the strength as well. And what do we say? Hashem Elokeinu, Yud-Ke Vav-Ke is Elokeinu. In other words, that this, our strength and our life force is Havaya, is Yud-Ke Vav-Ke. In other words, and a more simpler level of understanding is that which is above nature, as nature in itself is defined by time and space. And space and time are limited to space and time. 1 o'clock is not 101. Great Neck is not Brooklyn. Even if within Great Neck itself, one home is not the other. Time, there's a present, there's a past, and there's a future. But Havaya, Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, is an anagram. Haya, Hove, V'Hiyeh. Was, is, and will be. In other words, above time and space. That, as Chassidus explains, in the Ramban, Moshe ben Nachman, known as Nachmanides, explains that to Hashem, past, present, and future are all one. Hashem is essentially above time and space. And that's the kavanah that we have when we say the Shema. Havaya Elokeinu. Our nature, our strength is above the world, is above nature. That no matter what a person sees with their natural born eyes, they need to know and internalize that they're above this. And the intention is, now that I know this, my aim is to draw from above the world into the world. To connect and fuse that which is above creation into the nitty-gritty of creation. Shema Yisrael, the Yisrael is talking to our neshama. As we know, Israel, the name Israel, originated with the third of the three patriarchs, Yaakov. When he was born, he was called Yaakov. But after struggling with Esav's angels, as well as his sojourn in Lavan's house and everything that he had to work over there in order to bring godliness and to be able to refine the place. After that, and I struggled with Esav, successfully struggling with Esav's angel, his name was changed from Yaakov to Israel. As Shem says, because you struggle with great ministers and angels and you succeeded. Yaakov is Yud Akev. That's a struggler. Israel is the one who overcame the struggle, revealing their full potential into actuality. As we discussed several weeks ago, regarding overcoming trials and tribulations, that the entire purpose of the test that Hashem gives is in order to elicit that which is the potential, bring it out into actuality within the person themselves. Shema Yisrael, we're talking to our neshama. Listen, internalize neshama. Listen, take this in. In Yiddish, it's called deheren, internalizes. There's heren, listen, and deheren, and internalize. Internalize this neshama. Your strength, your life force, your vitality, your entire being is above the world. And for that reason, you're here to draw this into the confines of the world of time and space. And this knowledge and grasping and internalizing that Havaya is Elokeinu, that Yud Kei Vav Kei is Elokeinu. In other words, our strength, our vitality. This comes through contemplating and meditating upon Echad, one. Echad is not Yachid, that it's unique. Yachid means he's unique. There's nothing other than him. There's no one like him. Echad, one, means that from all the details within the one, you can recognize the sum total, which is one. On a practical level, as we discussed already several times, that's recognized in every single detail of this world. Ein on milvado, there's nothing other than him, means it doesn't means this world doesn't exist. It very much does exist because Hashem says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. Hashem says in the Torah that this world is tangible, practical, exists. So, but Ein Om Milvado doesn't mean that nothing exists, God forbid. It means that everything that we encounter, it is all an expression of Hashem's oneness. That it's the ultimate testimony to Him's oneness. Very interesting. And a side note, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, in a monumental discourse on Ahavat Yisrael in 1898, brings the point. Hold on one second. Yeah. It brings the point, the conversation between Yaakov and Esav when they met after all those years. Yaakov offers Esav more prestige, more present, and he says, Esav responds, I don't need yeshli harbe. I have a lot. I don't need, thank you very much, but I have a lot already. When Yaakov responded to such an offer, he says, yeshli kol, I have all. Seemingly just a euphemism of the same word. No, thank you, I'm good. But harbe, a lot implies there are many things happening. Many things. I have my work, and I have my family, and also I have my livestock, and also I have my hobbies. But each stream lives in an independent bubble of everything else. There's no cohesion. Yes, all these things can comply with each other, but there's no essential fusion or cohesion between these or any of these factors. And to that end, when one is active, it would by definition either take away or overwhelm the other. And being that Esav neshama came from a world of tohu, of chaos, and what makes it chaos is that everything is independent of everything. It doesn't. It does not. It does not melt together. It doesn't fuse. It doesn't synthesize. Chesed wants to reign supreme. No room for Gvura. Gvura, in turn, wants to reign supreme. No room for Chesed. There's no middle line. There's no synthesis. For this reason, Esav says, "Yesh li harbe, I have a lot." That's tohu. Yesh li kol, Yaakov says, I have all means, yeah, you could have all that's on my table right now, but it's all on the table. It's all part of the same configuration. I have all my organs and sinews. Yes, they're countless, 613 to be precise, base organs and sinews. But nevertheless, I don't call each part its own part aside from my body. It's all my body. Each part in itself is an expression of life, of the same life that my body is maintaining. So no matter how many details are involved, all those details are just an expression of that oneness. So from this, as we learned, that every single movement of the leaf is an expression of an individual leaf, an individual blade of grass. When a leaf falls one place over another, when a person comes over here, all of that is an expression of the oneness of Hashem. In other words, it wasn't just a freak accident or mistake or the devil got involved or everything is Hashem. And when a person really internalizes that, the echad, as the Rebbe is going to define it throughout the discourse, the practical and psychological meaning of that, an application of that, but nevertheless, from meditating upon echad, one will come to really internalize Arvaya as a Elokeinu. That Yudke Vavke is in fact our nature and our strength. Now, from all of this, a previous Rebbe then notes a seeming discrepancy, but what we learned from what we said in the beginning. All that requires mental contemplation, mental assessment, mental meditation, which is all analogous to Kavanas HaMoach, the intention of the mind. But Rabbi Meir says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad requires Kavanat Halev, the intention of the heart. But from what our sages teach, it's seemingly Shema Yisrael requires Kavanat HaMoach for really delve into this mentally, psychologically. Where does the Kavanas Halev come into the place? How do we reconcile these two? But that's our halacha, that you need Kavanas Halev. In order to understand this, we must first understand the word echad, one. In Bereshit, in Genesis, upon the completion of the first day, It says, "V'yi erev v'yi boker yom echad," and it was evening and it was daytime one day. The Rebbe explains, Yom echad, the one day, could only be called one day, a complete day, a complete entity, when it includes both evening and morning time. That the 24 hours of the day are broken into 12 evening hours and 12 daylight hours or daytime hours. And that's a complete entity, a complete day. And from the Torah's perspective, one day is not just an inclusive that the entity includes both night and day, but giving preference to the nighttime means a full day is when you begin with the nighttime and you end up in the daytime. That the nighttime precedes daytime. In other words, in order to get to the luminescence of the daytime, the clarity, the light, the splendor, first one needs to navigate through the darkness of the night. And to work through the nighttime hours, the confusion, the lack of clarity, and so on and so forth. Only once someone goes through that darkness period and is able to work through it, then they could come to the full truth of morning light. When the convert in Tractate Shabbat, when the convert came to Shammai, the president of the Sanhedrin, I'm sorry, the Av Beis Din, the head Rav of the Jewish Supreme Court, a convert approached him and says, "Convert me on the premise that you teach me the entire Torah on 1 foot." What did Shammai do? He picked up his measuring stick, as we discussed in other classes. Shammai, aside from being the head of the Supreme Court, he was also an architect. So he had by his desk a measuring stick. What does the Talmud says? When the convert asked Shammai to convert him on the premise that he teaches the entire Torah on 1 foot, Shammai picked up the measuring stick, and it seems that he chased him out of the study hall. But Chassidus assesses and says, "Wait a second, how does that make sense?" Is Shammai himself is quoting Pirkei Avot, says, "Greet every single person favorably, with a smiling countenance." And here's a convert who's coming to ask for Torah. If you don't agree with this sentiment, or you think he's belittling Torah, you should say, you should go find another rabbi to speak to. Or give him something tangible. But to chase him out of the base midrash, out of the study hall with a stick, that's becoming of a rav. And for what purpose would the Torah put this in, cement this story for all history, to God forbid, to defame a rav, and not just any rav, Shammai. But the Chassidus, the Mezritch Magid, Rabbi Dov Ber, who succeeded the Baal Shem Tov, explains the Chaz v'Shalom Shammai wasn't being obtrusive or negligent, God forbid. Shammai gave the answer for what the convert was asking. On the depth, the convert was asking for one-footed Judaism. Give me a Judaism that I don't have to pivot between Chesed and Gvura, between light and darkness. Just give me the key to allowing to be one-footed, that I'll always be inspired. that'll always feel good, that'll always be ambitious. I don't want to fall into the darkness and its trappings. Shammai did not chas v'shalom drive him away. He gave him the answer, and then the comrade left. He got the answer. He picked up the measuring stick. What was it about the measuring stick? The Torah deems the 7 days of creation Shivat Yemei HaBinyan, the 7 days of building. And in a building, you must have the foundation, first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. In other words, and we know in order to get to Shabbat, we need to go through 6 days of the work week. Shammai was giving the answer. You're looking for one-footed Judaism where you could only experience magnificence and splendor and light and so on and so forth with no darkness, with no confusions, no pitfalls. You can't get to the top floor if there are not preceding floors before it. That's not building. Why are you looking for the easy way out? That's not building anything. You got to go through the nitty gritty. Yes, there's going to be times of light and there's times of darkness. But nevertheless, you have to go through. That's a complete entity. There's no way you're going to get to the 10th floor if you didn't first go through the first. Echad means a complete entity which includes both darkness and the light, and one must first precede the darkness, deal with it in actuality, not just to go through it and survive, but actually deal and respond to it. And then one gets to the full magnificence of light. The advantage of light that emanates from darkness. And we'll conclude today's session with a Maisa, with an anecdote that the Rav who took over Reb Mendel, incidentally, Reb Mendel's yortzeit is coming up the 4th of Tammuz, as he passed away exactly 1 year and a day after Gimel Tammuz. So the one who took over him is Rabbi Gopin. Who's Baruch Hashem, he's a mashpia in Kfar Chabad and gives over chassidus and so on. But in an interview, and you can see this interview, mentioned the first, when he spent a year in 770 as a bacher, as a young student, he had a private audience with the Rebbe, and he opened up his dilemma. Says there's days that he's very inspired and he's very confident and he wants to learn and he wants to add more and more and he thrives. But then there's times he feels a contraction inside himself and he loses that desire. So he asks the Rebbe, what do I do about those times? How do I avoid these times? And the Rebbe gave him a truly unique perspective. He says, what you're asking for effectively is chaos. What you're asking for is that only chesed, no gvura, only light, no darkness. That's Torah. That's exactly what the world of Torah looks like. Only one thing and nothing else. No inclusion, no chesed or gvura. You choose, black or white. There's no in between here. The Rebbe says, rather, you must learn how to utilize both. And the time when you feel inspired and ambitious, Baruch Hashem, move with that. Go forward with that. Expand. That's indicative that Hashem is shining His countenance upon you, midas chesed, of kindness. But when you feel that contraction, That means now it's a time to pause the expansion, continue everything you've done thus far, but don't add. Now delve deep, internalize everything you've learned thus far. That's gvura. Harness everything that you've gained through the chesed period, delve deep and fully understand it so you can move forward. So echad means a full entity comprises of evening and daytime, 12 hours of this, 12 hours of this, and evening precedes daytime. In order for us to be able to deal with that confusion, in order for us to deal with the obstructions, et cetera, internalize everything that we understood thus far and utilize that to transform that darkness into boker or, the day, the morning light. Any questions?
Hi, Rabbi. Thank you so much for today. Regarding the evening before light, the darkness before light, in previous classes you've spoken about also not making sure that it's a regression or the opposite of life, that like you mentioned, to get to the magnificence, we have to go deep and work through the darkness. So what's the litmus test to make sure that we're actually working through the darkness and not just in it, but we're actually getting to the light?
You answered yourself in the question that we have to. The question is it the we that's doing it? You just gauge yourself. Is this a real me? If I'm saying this word, do I truly believe that? Could I back this up with actual data, with actual truth? Do I stand by this? Am I confident that if I had to explain myself to the Rebbe right now, or to Hashem, or to my grandchildren, for why am I doing this right now? Is this reflecting me? Is this the true me? Otherwise, it's a regression. That's the way the Yetzer Hara does draw you. He gives associations which have no data. Just ask yourself, the next time I'm going through a dark, whatever that is, it could be in marriage, with children, in career, whatever it is, every one of us has this. Ask yourself, what's the data that supports it? In actuality, according to, not according to the world, according to Torah. The real me would want to operate, only wants to operate. As Alter Rebbe explains in the beginning of chapter 4 of Tanya, that the godly soul's levushim, that the godly soul's garments, are hyper-focused only on God in every single situation. So you have to ask yourself, according to Chassidus, if I learn Chassidus, if I don't learn Chassidus, okay, according to Midrash, according to Gemara, according to Torah, whatever it is, but according to Hashem, not according to my nefesh ba'amis, my animal soul, who wants just to survive in anything that, according to the truth, is this me? Do I firmly believe that I'm doing the godly thing here? Not, as we discuss, religion is like, yeah, I want to go to heaven, so I don't care if I bash you and I destroy you, if I completely eliminate you, so long as I go to heaven. That's not the Yetzer Tov, that's not the godly soul, that's just the opposite. That's man-made. Here, ask yourself, is this the we? Is this the me? This is how I want it? Am I thinking, saying, and doing from the point of absolute truth, that if I went to the Rebbe, I could look him in his eyes and tell him, Rebbe, I'm doing this for the truth. Because the advantage of light that emanates from the darkness has several meanings. First of all, in contrast, when a person is submerged in darkness, a little light dispels a lot of darkness. So the contrast between a little light and a whole bunch of darkness, that's already has an advantage. The light definitely has an advantage over darkness. A deeper explanation is that the darker it is, the more light I need. So because of this darkness, I need to now really delve deep in order to bring out light that I would never need, clarity and strength that I never need in normal daytime lit situations. The deepest is that this darkness represents the ultimate light. That there's, as we discussed, and the Rebbe Rashab brings in the discourse, in the Hanukkah discourse, I believe in 1893, that there's there's white light and there's black light. There's a light that when it shines, it illuminates and reveals, and there's a light that when it shines, it conceals. But it's a light, nevertheless. It is an expression. What kind of expression is there to conceal? But as we discussed at the other day's class on Friday, that which you're blessed with, which means this is your operating tool that Hashem believed in you. And if your parents didn't treat you right, or you went through things thus far, and everything seems to be chaotic, or this or this or that, that means that this is where Hashem wants you to innovate. For that reason, He gave you that darkness, to utilize it, not to Chas v'Shalom, to utilize it as a weapon, to weaponize it, but it's the opposite, to utilize it in order to grow, to transform. The ultimate definitely talking about ha'oreh ba'min ha'cheshech is the light that literally comes from darkness. That this place of darkness, of confusion, was always there for a purpose. It wasn't a lack of light that brought to this darkness. This is the darkness that Hashem created as darkness. Yosher oru voreh choshech, as we say in davening. He forms light and creates darkness. This is the darkness that essentially is created in such a fashion. For what? For us to be able to utilize, to transform it. So the question is, in dealing with whatever confusion, is this you? Because the only way you could do this point requires Mesiras Nefesh. In order to transform darkness into light, two completely different creations, requires the part of us which is not associated and trapped by creation itself, which is the essential you, the Pinteliid. In other words, Mesiras Nefesh. As we open up that the Rebbe said in the last Gimel Tammuz talk that we learned, 1991, that the Nasi had to go through that, to be beaten and tortured and so on and so forth. And as the previous Rebbe indicated in the journal entry, I knew I'm going to go with full Mesiras Nefesh. I'm going to go straight at them. And I knew going forward is going to cost me a lot, and it did. But there's no other way to transform that darkness other than from within, and the only way to do it is Mesiras Nefesh. And incidentally, I think we discussed this just 2 or 3 weeks ago. The Rebbe said, or 2 weeks ago, the Rebbe in his discourse, Gimel Tammuz discourse, explains that in serving Hashem, all of Yiddishkeit is predicated on one point and one point only. Not Torah and not mitzvot. Mesiras Nefesh. Whatever Hashem wants, to give yourself 100% into it. In other words, not just, okay, so woe is me, okay, so I'm going to just have to comply and shut up. But I get to do this, and I'm going to do this with everything that I have. I'm not going to spare a single part of myself. I'm going to give myself over completely into it. As we discussed in last week's class, when the Jewish people broke into those 4 groups, should we commit suicide because it's too much? I can't deal with this anymore, so I'm just going to shut down, or I'm going to sequester myself in the world of Torah, or whether it is going to go back to Egypt. We tried our best. It's not going to work out. Let's just go back to the way things were, to the darkness, to enslavement, to and so on and so forth. Because I essentially don't believe that anything that I'm capable of doing good, or things that are going to work out in the long run. So no matter how good it could be for a week, I'm going to bamboozle that. I'm going to go back to Egypt. And it's called self-sabotaging. Or to go fight them, to go fight after fight, just go fight. Nobody asks you to do that, nor to pray. Go forward. But the one who split the sea, Nachshon ben Aminadav, did exactly what Moshe said to do: walk forward. And he walked into the sea until the water came completely over him. And only then did the sea split. In other words, Mesiras Nefesh is only when you're 100% immersed in it. Not part of you being resentful. Why do I have to Mesiras Nefesh? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to? It's not fair. It's not right. It's not this. You know what? Okay, so I'll do it. But don't expect me to be enthusiastic about it. Don't expect me to be joyful or happy. I'll do it like a robot. Yiddishkeit is predicated upon Mesiras Nefesh. And the entire, what's Mesiras Nefesh? Literally, if you think about the words Mesirat Nefesh, to give over your soul means to bring your soul out and deliver it to this situation right now. What does your soul say about this? What is the peace of God? A peace of God from above. In actuality, as we discuss, that the Tzemach Tzedek explained mamish, in actuality, seems to contradict the peace of God from above, because mamashut, in actuality, and God are seemingly two different planes. But as the Tzemach Tzedek explains, this phraseology that the Alter Rebbe used is to show that this peace of God, which is above the world loftiness, could come down into the mamashut and penetrate the mamashut, the actuality, the coarse actuality of the world. That nothing will stop it. Mesiras Nefesh is literally bring your neshama to this. Are you here? Are you focused in here? Are you is this a real you, or is this your traumas? This is this, and this is that. Whatever it is, it's not you. In order to deal with that darkness, the real you has to come out. Because as the Rebbe explains in the discourse, the first Yud Beis Tammuz, 12 of Tammuz discourse, which one that we learned, discussed many times, when citing the Mitter Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe's son, Rabbi Dov Ber, explains when the Yechida comes out through Mesiras Nefesh, because the entire purpose of Yechida should come out, the quintessential self, Yechida Lechadach, the part of our neshama was always worth of the Hashem. When the Yechida come out, the test is no longer a test. Because from the Yechida, there's nothing other than God. So what was it to get excited about? What is it to be taken aback by? In order to get to that place, you have to be put into the test, into that darkness. But the entire thing of darkness is, as we discussed in another class, this Yosher Or Choshech, it creates darkness. This is not a darkness that is a result of a lack of light. This is a darkness that the Zohar says, first there's darkness and there's light. What makes darkness darkness? Well, this is not an obstruction of light. This darkness that we're talking about, he creates this darkness, is actually the expression of Atmos, of the essence. Essence, as we discussed many, many times, as the previous Rebbe says in a Parsha Noach discourse in 1939, something essential is constant. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't grow, it doesn't diminish. And because of that quality, it cannot express. Because expression requires it to develop outside to more light, less light, but there's degrees. Essence, by definition, is something that doesn't fluctuate, therefore it doesn't express. So when it shines, for lack of a better term, it brings darkness. The tests and the darkness that we are talking about is not a lack of light. We're talking about a relation of the atmos, of essence. And that's the entire reason why a person, or a person, a couple, a family, friends go through these tests in order to bring the etzem out, the point that's not going to fluctuate. But so long as they want to hold on to their logic or their emotions, though they may be incongruent, nevertheless hold on, because that's a comfort zone. They're not going to develop anything. And as we discussed in last week's class, as per the previous Rebbe's Maimer, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe's Maimer, the Rebbe's Maimer, once a person reacts, he or she resets the test to start again. To start again. And until the person doesn't respond correctly, as the Rebbe explains a discourse, unlike when it comes to birurim, to elevating the world, refining the world, which requires dealing objectively with the world. That means I need to employ my seichel, my intellect, or my emotions to figure out how do I elevate the spark, what bracha, what so on and so forth. But here, as we discussed several weeks ago, the test is not objective, it's very subjective. It's in you. It's propagating the way you understand reality, what your perception right now, that's where the spark is. If there's no spark, you wouldn't have this perception. In order to overcome it, you have to connect to the real you, not to the logic, not to the emotions. Those are right now a barrier. And so if a person now is in a course of a test reacting to the logic or to the emotions, and therefore to the externality, make it about the objective, not about the subjective. I need to internalize. I need to understand where I bring my real self out, not how I'm looking at to someone else. Then the press the reset button. The test is going to happen again and again, and each time become more complex. So in order to be able to respond to the test requires the essence to come out, not your logic, not your emotions. You, when you come out, then the test stops being a test, because from the you perspective, you know everything is God. Then you know that this is not against you. This is exactly what you were here to do. There's a lot to be said, but tonight, Mr. we're having for bringing. I invite everybody over here to we're going to join us in Zoom or join us in person, or if you can join us in person. But this Farbrengen is a monumental Farbrengen Baruch Hashem for Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. As we said, Tammuz is the fourth month. Gomel Dalim, Gimel, the third month. Sivan Dalim is the impoverished. In other words, to take the third month, which we received the Torah, and now bring it to the world in itself. Hold on 1 second. I'm giving a test. I'm giving a class. Is to give it to the world in itself. In other words, as we said, that Tammuz is the name of Avodah Zarah. And the aim is to take the Gimel of the third month and give it to the Daled and to the impoverishment, to utilize the light that we received in order to transform the darkness of this world. And for that reason, we're going to have it for bringing tonight. Emir Hashem, please join us in person and Zoom if you cannot join us in person, but in person is always better. And in Hashem, we're also going to have a farbrengen for Yud Beit Tammuz in by the Ohel, as we always do every single year. Thank you so much, and let's do something about this.
Thank you so much, Amin. Have a great day.
Okay.